She sent the text to the wrong number. A merciless Korean Mafia boss replied, "Wrong number, but I'm already 5 minutes away. Lock the door." Zara Banks' thumb hovered over the smeared glass of her phone, her right hand a useless weight of white bandages. The rigid plastic of her neck brace dug into her jaw, forcing her to stare straight ahead at the cold, clinical tiles of the bathroom floor. Each breath was a struggle against the bruise blooming like a dark flower on her cheek. Outside the door, the sound of her husband's voice was like velvet over sandpaper. "Zara, honey, you're overreacting. Let me in so I can check those bandages." The same voice that, an hour ago, had pinned her to the hallway floor until her world turned into the sound of cracking bone. With a shaking left hand, she fumbled for her cousin's contact. Her vision was a blur of salt and terror. She typed the message, "He broke my hand. My neck. I can't move. Please dot," and hit send. The phone buzzed instantly. "Who is this?" "You have the wrong number." Zara's heart plummeted. She was a ghost reaching for a shadow. "Please," she typed back, her tears hitting the screen. "He's breaking the door. Help." Miles away, Lee Junho sat in the back of a black sedan, the warm light of the city catching the geometric tattoos on his neck. He studied the text with a terrifying stillness. He didn't ask who she was. He already knew. "Stay hidden," the screen flashed. 5 minutes. "I'm coming." Zara tucked herself into the corner of the tub, shrinking away from the splintering wood of the door. The last thing she saw before the screen dimmed was the stranger's final message. "Hold on." The porcelain was cold against Zara's skin, but it was the only thing keeping her upright. She sat wedged between the base of the toilet and the bathtub, her body curled into a tight, defensive ball. Every breath was a jagged ordeal, a sharp reminder of the rigid plastic neck brace that held her head at an agonizingly stiff angle. Her right hand, a thick club of white gauze and medical tape, rested uselessly in her lap. She looked down at it, the bandages already beginning to bloom with a faint, rusty pink where the pressure of her husband's grip had reopened the skin beneath. On the other side of the heavy oak door, the house was silent, a silence more terrifying than the screaming that had preceded it. Then came the heavy, rhythmic thud of a shoulder hitting the wood. "Zara, baby." Marcus's voice drifted through the cracks, smooth and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice he used when he was trying to convince himself he was the victim. "You're being dramatic again. You know how you get. Just open the door so I can see if you're actually hurt or if you're just putting on a show." Zara didn't breathe. She couldn't. She stared at her reflection in the polished chrome of the towel rack, barely recognizing the woman with the tear-streaked face and the dark, swelling bruise that marred the curve of her cheek. Her eyes were wide, the whites vivid against her deep complexion, reflecting a primal, trapped animal terror. Thud! The door frame groaned. A hairline fracture appeared in the wood near the top hinge. "I'm losing my patience, Zara. If I have to break this door, you know what happens next. Don't make me do something we'll both regret." With a trembling left hand, she reached for the phone she had tucked into the waistband of her leggings. Her fingers were slick with sweat and blood, making the touch screen feel like ice. Her vision blurred, salt stinging her eyes as she pulled up her messages. She needed her brother, Andre. He was the only one who still looked at her with pity instead of judgment. He was the only one who might actually call the police, regardless of Marcus's status in the neighborhood. She tapped a contact name, a blur of letters that her panicked brain registered as Andre, and began to type. Her one good thumb flew across the glass, hitting the wrong keys, deleting and retyping as the wood behind her back vibrated with another blow. "He broke my hand. My neck. I can't move. Marcus is going to kill me. 842 Magnolia Lane. Please." She didn't double-check the number. She didn't look at the contact photo. She just hit send with a sob that caught her throat. The little blue bubble floated upward, a digital message in a bottle cast into a violent sea. She watched the delivered status appear, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird in a cage. Thud! The splintering sound was louder now. A piece of the door molding fell to the floor, clattering like bone. "One," Marcus shouted, his voice finally losing its veneer of civility. "Two." Zara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact, waiting for the ghost of her brother to reply, to say he was coming, to tell her to hold on. Her phone chimed, a sharp, clear sound in the small space. She looked down, expecting a frantic series of questions from Andre. Instead, the text bubble was gray. The words were short, precise, and devoid of the panic she had expected. Wrong number. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. The air in the bathroom turned thin. She had sent her final plea to a stranger. She had wasted her last chance on a ghost in the machine. She began to type back, her movements frantic, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp as Marcus's fist hammered against the wood right behind her head. "Please," she wrote, the screen shimmering under a fresh layer of tears. "I am sorry. I don't know who this is. But please, he's breaking the door. He's going to kill me. 842 Magnolia. Help." She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the glass, waiting for the stranger to tell her they were calling the police or to tell her to stop joking. The phone buzzed again. This time, the reply was different. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a denial. It was a command. "I'm already 5 minutes away. Lock the door. Stay small." Zara stared at the screen, her breath hitching. The phrasing was wrong. Too cold, too certain. It wasn't the response of a good Samaritan. It was the response of a hunter. But as the door hinge finally gave way with a sickening metallic snap and Marcus's shadow loomed through the widening gap, Zara tucked her phone against her chest and pressed herself into the corner, praying that whatever monster she had just summoned was faster than the one standing in the doorway. Outside the tinted windows of the Maybach, the neon lights of the city blurred into streaks of electric blue and violent violet. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive leather and a silence so profound it felt heavy. Lee Junho sat perfectly still, the rhythmic hum of the high-performance engine beneath him the only sign of movement. The warm interior lighting caught the sharp, geometric lines of the ink on his neck, tattoos that marked him not just as a man of violence, but as a man of absolute order. He did not look at the city. His gaze was fixed on the custom-encrypted smartphone resting in his palm. When a notification light pulsed, a rhythmic, urgent red, he didn't flinch. He simply swiped the screen with a steady thumb. The message was a jagged cry for help, full of typos and raw terror. "He broke my hand. My neck. I can't move." Junho's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained a mask of marble. Most men would have felt a surge of adrenaline or a flicker of confusion at receiving such a text from an unknown number. Junho felt only a cold, predatory satisfaction. He recognized the address instantly. 842 Magnolia Lane. He didn't need a GPS to know exactly which window belonged to the bathroom where Zara Banks was currently bleeding. He had memorized the blueprints of that house 3 years ago, the same night he had first decided that she was a masterpiece being ruined by a lesser man. He looked at the second message. "He's breaking the door. He's going to kill me." Junho leaned forward slightly, the silk of his tailored black suit jacket shifting over his broad shoulders. He reached up, his long fingers grazing the knot of his silver-gray silk tie, adjusting it with a clinical precision that bordered on the ritualistic. He wasn't preparing for a rescue. He was preparing for a reclamation. To the rest of the world, he was a merciless ghost, a myth spoken of in the backrooms of Seoul and the shipping yards of the coast. To Zara, he was about to become the only thing in the universe that mattered. "Sir," the driver asked softly, his eyes meeting Junho's in the rearview mirror. The driver had seen that look before, the stillness of a blade before it falls. "Magnolia Lane," Junho said, his voice a low, melodic rasp that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Ignore the lights. We arrive in 4 minutes. And the husband, sir?" Junho turned his gaze back to the phone, his thumb tracing the words, "He broke my hand." The geometric tattoos on his neck seemed to tighten as he jaw set. He thought of Zara's resilience, the way she had endured the unendurable for so long, and the way her spirit had finally reached out through the digital void to find the one man capable of burning the world down to keep her safe. The husband is an error in the system, Junho whispered, the words barely audible over the hum of the tires. And I am here to delete him. He tapped out his final response, stay small, and watch the message send. A ghost of a smile, cold and devoid of humor, touched his lips. For 3 years, he had been a shadow in her life, a silent guardian she never knew she had. He had watched her suffer, waiting for the exact moment when her desperation would outweigh her fear, waiting for her to realize that the law was a lie and only power was real. Finally, he breathed. He pocketed the phone and stared out at the passing skyline, his reflection in the glass overlapping with the flickering lights. He looked like a king going to war, serene and utterly terrifying. As the car swerved into the turning lane, the tires screaming against the asphalt, Lee Junho didn't feel the rush of the chase. He only felt the inevitable pull of a destiny he had authored himself. In 4 minutes, the bathroom door would fall, but Marcus Banks would find that the thing waiting on the other side wasn't a broken woman, but the wrath of a man who had been waiting a lifetime to say mine. The bathroom door didn't just open, it vanished. One moment, Marcus was a looming shadow behind the splintering wood, his heavy breathing a rhythmic threat. The next, a muffled, pneumatic crack echoed through the hallway, and the door was kicked inward with such force the hinges tore like wet paper. Zara pressed her back into the corner of the bathtub. Her bandaged hand clutched to her chest. She expected chaos. She expected the deafening roar of police sirens and shouting men. Instead, the apartment fell into a terrifying, surgical silence. 2 men moved into the small space with the synchronized grace of predators. They weren't wearing police blues. They were dressed in charcoal tactical gear, their faces obscured by matte black balaclavas, their movements devoid of the frantic energy of a typical raid. There was no shouting. There was only the metallic click of weapons being lowered and the heavy, dull thud of Marcus being slammed against the hallway wall. Zara's breath hitched in her throat as she peered past the broken doorframe. Marcus, the man who had spent years making himself the largest, most terrifying object in her universe, looked suddenly, pathetically small. A thick, gloved hand was clamped over his mouth, and a zip tie was being cinched around his wrists with a sharp, plastic hiss. For the first time in their marriage, Zara didn't see anger in her husband's eyes. She saw a raw, sickening terror, the look of a man who had finally encountered something far more monstrous than himself. Then, the heavy silence of the hallway parted. Lee Junho stepped into the light of the apartment. He looked entirely out of place amidst the violence, his tailored black suit uncreased, his silver gray tie perfectly centered. He didn't look at the tactical team, and he didn't look at the man struggling against the wall. His eyes went straight to the bathroom floor, to Zara. The geometric tattoos on his neck seemed to darken under the harsh fluorescent lights as his gaze drifted from the rigid plastic of her neck brace to the blood-spotted bandages on her hand. He didn't move toward her immediately. He simply stood there, a figure of absolute authority, absorbing the evidence of her pain with a clinical, terrifying intensity. "Shake here, Yunho commended." His voice was a low, melodic rasp that seemed to vibrate in the small space. One of the men knelt beside Zara. He didn't reach for her roughly. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he checked her pulse and the stability of the brace. Zara remained frozen, her eyes locked on Junho. She felt like a bird being watched by a cobra, terrified, yet unable to look away from the sheer, magnetic power he radiated. Marcus let out a muffled groan, a desperate plea for mercy through the gloved hand. Junho finally turned his head, looking at the husband as if he were a smudge on an otherwise perfect painting. "You broke what didn't belong to you," Junho said softly. He stepped closer to Marcus, leaning in until their faces were inches apart. "In my world, that is a debt that can only be paid in kind. But you are lucky. Today, I am feeling merciful. The irony in his tone was colder than the bathroom tile. Junho gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Without a word, the two men hauled Marcus toward the front door. He didn't fight back. His legs gave out, his heels dragging across the hardwood floor with a hollow, scraping sound. He was a man being deleted from his own life, erased by a force he couldn't even name. Zara watched him go, a strange, hollow numbness spreading through her chest. The man who had been her personal sun and storm was gone in a matter of seconds, dragged into the night as if he had never existed at all. Junho turned back to her. He reached out a hand, not to grab her, but as an invitation. His palm was broad, his fingers long and steady. "The car is waiting, Zara," he said. He didn't ask if she wanted to go. He didn't ask if she was okay. He spoke with the quiet inevitability of a man who had already decided her future. "From this moment on, no one touches you unless I allow it. Do you understand?" Zara looked at his hand, then up at the sharp lines of his face. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it was a flickering realization. She had traded a petty tyrant for a merciless king. And as she reached out with her good hand to take his, she knew there was no turning back. Junho pulled her up with effortless strength, his arms sliding around her waist to steady her against the stiffness of the neck brace. He didn't look back at the ruined apartment. He led her out into the cool night air, where a line of black SUVs stood waiting like a funeral procession for her old life. The execution of mercy was complete. The reclamation had begun. The transition from the cold, splintered tiles of her bathroom to the silk-lined silence of the estate was a blur of painkillers and the rhythmic purr of a high-end engine. When Zara finally opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the light. It wasn't the harsh, flickering fluorescent hum of her old life, but a soft, amber glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She was lying in a bed that felt like a cloud, the sheets cool and impossibly smooth against her skin. The room was vast, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a darkened skyline she didn't recognize. This wasn't a hospital, yet the equipment surrounding her was more advanced than anything she'd seen in a medical center. There were digital monitors that pulsed with a quiet, heartbeat-like rhythm, and the air smelled faintly of expensive sandalwood and sterile cleanliness. A woman in a crisp, white lab coat was leaning over her, her movements precise and hushed. She was a specialist. That much was clear from the way she handled Zara's right hand. The thick, blood-stained bandages from the apartment were gone, replaced by a specialized orthopedic brace that looked more like a piece of high-tech armor than a cast. Zara tried to shift, but a sharp spike of awareness reminded her of the rigid support around her neck. She let out a small, involuntary whimper. "Steady, Mrs. Banks," the doctor said softly, her voice devoid of the usual clinical coldness. The surgery to reset the metacarpals was successful. The neck brace is a precaution for the soft tissue damage. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt heavy and foreign. Zara's eyes drifted toward the periphery of the room. Searching for the source of the silence, she felt pressing against the walls. That was when she saw him. Lee Junho was standing in the shadows of the far corner, near a set of heavy velvet drapes. He had removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the sharp, geometric edges of the tattoos that climbed his throat. He wasn't sitting. He was simply existing in the space, a statue of dark intent watching her every breath. The warm light didn't reach his eyes, leaving them as two cold, impenetrable depths. "Is she in pain?" Junho's voice drifted from the shadows, low and resonant. "The nerve block is holding, Mr. Lee," the specialist replied, not looking up from her work. "But the psychological trauma will take longer to stabilize." Junho didn't answer. He stepped forward, the light finally catching the sharp bridge of his nose and the steady, predatory focus in his gaze. He dismissed the doctor with a slight, almost imperceptible jerk of his chin. The woman gathered her instruments in a practiced motion and slipped out of the room, the heavy door closing with a soft, pressurized click that signaled the room was now an airtight vault. He walked to the side of the bed, his presence looming over Zara like a darkening sky. He didn't touch her, but his proximity felt like a physical weight. Zara looked up at him, her pulse quickening not with the frantic terror she felt for Marcus, but with a strange, magnetic dread. "This room," Zara whispered, her voice rasping against the brace. "Why?" Junho looked around at the mahogany finishes and the state-of-the-art medical monitors. "Everything in this house is the best the world has to offer. My doctors, my security, my silence. You are being broken in a house made of plywood and lies. Here, you will be rebuilt in a fortress." He reached out then, his long, steady fingers hovering just an inch above the new brace on her hand. He didn't make contact, yet Zara could feel the heat radiating from him. "The man you lived with is gone," Junho said, his voice dropping to a register that was almost a caress. "He's a ghost now. This room, this care, it costs more than his entire life was worth. Consider it a down payment on your new reality." Zara looked at the digital display of the heart monitor. Her heart rate was climbing, the rhythmic beep accelerating. She was no longer a victim hiding in a bathroom, but she realized with a sinking clarity that she was now an acquisition. She was the center of a gilded infirmary, surrounded by wealth she couldn't fathom and a man whose mercy was as terrifying as his wrath. Junho finally met her eyes, and for a fleeting second, the coldness in his gaze flickered with something possessive and ancient. "Sleep, Zara. Tomorrow, you will realize that you haven't just been saved. You've been found." He turned back toward the shadows, leaving her in the amber glow of the monitors, a queen in a cage of golden glass. The morning sun didn't rise so much as it bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the expanse of the suite. Zara remained propped against a mountain of pillows, her neck brace a constant, cold reminder of her fragility. The high-tech monitors hummed a low, hypnotic tune, the only sound in the room until the heavy door clicked open. Lee Junho entered with the same soundless precision he had displayed the night before. He held a tablet in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He looked rested, his dark hair swept back, his white shirt crisp and stark against the tan of his throat where the geometric ink began. He didn't speak as he approached the bed. He simply set the glass on the nightstand and tapped the tablet screen, turning it toward her. "Look," he said, his voice a gravelly caress. Zara squinted at the screen. It was a local news site, the headline scrolling in bold, black letters. "Tragic apartment fire at Magnolia Lane. 1 dead, 1 missing." Her heart gave a violent lurch, the monitor beside her chirping in response to her spiking pulse. "A fire? Marcus, is he?" "Marcus is not dead," Junho said, his expression as flat as a desert floor. "But the world believes he is a fugitive, and the world believes the body they found in the charred remains of your bathroom belongs to you." Zara felt the air leave her lungs. She looked at her bandaged hand, then back at the screen. "I don't understand. I'm right here. My brother. Andre will know. He'll look for me." "Your brother has already been notified of your passing," Junho countered, his tone devoid of empathy. "Dental records were provided. The case is closed. To the state, to the law, and to every person who ever knew your name, Zara Banks died last night. You're a ghost now." A cold, hollow numbness spread from her chest to her extremities. The realization was more suffocating than the neck brace. Every thread that connected her to her former life, her job, her family, her very identity, had been severed with a clinical, surgical finality. She looked up at Junho, her eyes swimming with a mixture of grief and mounting dread. "Why would you do this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "You saved me from him. Why kill me off to the rest of the world?" Junho stepped closer, leaning over the bed until he was within her personal space. The scent of sandalwood and something metallic, like a whetted blade, enveloped her. He reached out, his thumb tracing the edge of her jaw just above the plastic of the brace. His touch was terrifyingly light. "Protection has a price, Zara," he said, his gaze locking onto hers with a possessive intensity. "As long as you existed as Zara Banks, you were a target. Your husband had friends in the precinct. The law was his shield, not yours. By making you a ghost, I have made you untouchable. No one can hunt a woman who doesn't exist." He straightened up, his silhouette blotting out the morning sun. "But there is a catch. A ghost has no rights. A ghost cannot own property, cannot walk into a bank, cannot call for help. You have no one left to turn to. No brother. No law. No past." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy shroud. "I am your only anchor now," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, melodic vibration. "I am the one who feeds you, the one who heals you, and the one who decides when you breathe. You are safe, Zara, safer than you have ever been in your life. But you are mine, completely and irrevocably." Zara looked at the tablet, where the digital flames of the apartment fire flickered in a loop. She saw the ruins of the life she had tried so hard to maintain, the life that had almost killed her. Then she looked back at the man standing over her, the man who had watched her from the shadows for years, waiting for the moment he could erase her and rewrite her as his own. The monitor's rhythm slowed as a strange, dark acceptance began to take root in her mind. The terror of Marcus was gone, replaced by the heavy, golden weight of Junho's obsession. She was dead to the world, but for the first time, she saw herself reflected in the eyes of a man who saw her not as a victim, but as an acquisition of infinite value. "You've been waiting for this," she stated, her voice stronger than before. Junho didn't deny it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, cold and certain. "I don't believe in accidents, Zara. I believe in opportunities. You sent the text. I simply closed the door behind you." He turned to leave, but stopped at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. The geometric tattoos on his neck seemed to pulse in the light. "Rest now. Tomorrow, we begin the work of making you forget you ever had a life before me." The door shut with that same pressurized click, leaving Zara alone in her gilded room. She was safe, she was healed, and she was utterly lost. A queen in a kingdom of one, ruled by a man who had murdered her past to ensure he was the only one in her future. The days that followed were measured not by the rising sun, but by the quiet, ritualistic visits from Lee Junho. Zara had been moved from the medical bed to a chaise longue by the window, her body slowly knitting itself back together under the weight of silken robes and heavy silence. The neck brace had been exchanged for a softer support, allowing her to turn her head just enough to watch him when he entered. He came to her in the twilight, the hour when the city below began to sparkle like a bed of cold jewels. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. He preferred the amber glow of the perimeter lamps that cast long, sharp shadows across the floor. He sat on the edge of the chaise, closer than he had ever been, and began the slow process of unwinding the compression wrap from her hand to inspect the surgical site. As he worked, his sleeves were rolled back to the elbows, exposing the full intricacy of the ink that defined him. The geometric tattoos weren't mere decoration. They were a complex map of sharp angles, interlocking diamonds, and heavy black bands that climbed from his wrists, up his forearms, and disappeared beneath his collar to emerge at his jawline. Zara watched his hands, steady, large, and surprisingly gentle. "What are they?" she whispered, her voice finally losing the ragged edge of the hospital room. She reached out with her left hand, her fingertips hovering just above a jagged, triangular pattern on his inner wrist. "They aren't just art. They look like records." Junho didn't pull away. He paused, his thumb resting against her palm, and looked down at his own skin as if reading a ledger. "They are milestones," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. He pointed to a dense cluster of interlocking hexagons near his elbow. This was the port of Busan. 3 years of blood to stabilize the shipping lanes. The diamonds on my shoulder? The high-rise districts in Seoul. He traced a long, vertical line that ran the length of his forearm, ending in a sharp, arrowhead point at his pulse. Every territory I've claimed, every empire I've dismantled and rebuilt is etched here. In my world, we do not keep trophies in cabinets. We wear our history so that anyone who looks at us knows exactly what we are capable of taking. Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked at the tattoos again, seeing them now for what they were, a tally of conquests. "You're a map of wars," she breathed. "I'm a map of wins," he corrected softly. He finished redressing her hand and finally looked up, his dark eyes capturing the amber light. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, moving upward until his thumb brushed the fading bruise on her cheek, the last visible mark of Marcus's ownership. "I have spent 15 years turning my body into a record of my power," Junho said, his gaze intensifying until Zara felt she couldn't breathe. "I have seized docks, banks, and cities. I have won wars that left hundreds dead in the streets." He leaned in closer, the scent of his expensive cologne and cold steel enveloping her. His thumb moved her lower lip, pressing slightly. But none of those markings matter anymore. The ports, the towers, the territories, they were just preparation. They were the wealth I needed to build a world where I could finally keep you. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs, the rhythm erratic and heavy. "I'm not a territory, Junho." "No," he whispered, his face inches from hers. "You are the prize. You are the most valuable gain of my life. I'll let you endure that, man, because I needed you to see the difference between a dog who bites and a lion who rules. I didn't just save you from a bathroom floor, Zara. I spent 5 years orchestrating the moment where you would belong only to me." He stood up then, his silhouette blotting out the city lights. He looked down at her, and for the first time, Zara didn't see a savior or a stranger. She saw a man who had curated his entire empire for the sole purpose of placing her at the center of it. "The tattoos stop at my neck," he said, his hand lingering on the door handle as he prepared to leave. "But if I were to mark my skin for you, I would have to cover my heart. Sleep well, Zara. You're the only thing I have ever taken that I intend to keep forever." The door clicked shut, leaving Zara in the dark. She looked down at her hand, safe in its expensive brace, and then out at the city. She was no longer a victim, but she was something else now, a masterpiece in a private gallery, the crown jewel of a man who never lost what he claimed. The heavy, motorized door to the west wing of the penthouse slid open with a whisper of brushed steel. Zara stepped through, her movements still measured and careful, the soft silk of her robe trailing behind her like a ghost. Junho was away on business, a word that carried the heavy scent of gunpowder and ink, and for the first time, the keypad to this specific suite had been left active for a thumbprint. The room she entered was not a bedroom or an office. It was a vault. The lighting was dim, motion-activated LEDs glowing to life as she moved deeper into the space. Zara stopped in the center of the room, her breath catching in a throat that still felt the phantom pressure of her old life. It was a gallery, but the art on the walls wasn't by masters. It was her. Against the far wall stood a series of glass-fronted cabinets, climate-controlled and pristine. Zara walked toward them, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the glass. Inside the first case sat a battered, wooden jewelry box, one she hadn't seen in 2 years. She had thought Marcus had thrown it away in one of his rages after she'd spent too much time looking at her mother's old pearls. But here it was, cleaned and preserved as if it were a holy relic. Beside it lay a collection of ticket stubs from every concert she had attended, every gallery opening she had worked, and even the menu from her 25th birthday dinner, a night Marcus had cut short by dragging her out of the restaurant by her hair. "You were never alone," she whispered to the empty room, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. She turned to the walls. They were covered in candid photographs. These weren't the staged, smiling pictures Marcus forced her to take for social media to maintain the illusion of their perfect marriage. These were shots taken from a distance, through rain-streaked cafe windows, across crowded subway platforms, and from the shadows of the park where she used to go just to breathe. In every photo, she looked the same. Haunted, fragile, yet possessing a resilient beauty that seemed to pull the light toward her. She saw herself crying on a park bench, and in the very next frame, she saw the silhouette of a black sedan parked a few yards away. Junho hadn't just been watching her. He had been documenting her slow destruction with the meticulous care of a man watching a star collapse. At the end of the room stood a singular pedestal. On it sat a small, digital recorder. With a shaking finger, Zara pressed play. The sound of Marcus's voice filled the room. Harsh, grating, and full of the venom she had lived with for years. "You're nothing without me, Zara. Look at you. Who else would want a broken thing like you?" Then, the recording cut. A new voice took over, Junho's. It was a recording of a phone call, his voice cold and devoid of the melody he used when speaking to her. "Let him think he's winning," Junho said to an unknown recipient. "Let him break her just enough so that when I step in, the transition is absolute. But if he touches her face again, kill him. I want her beautiful when she finally arrives." Zara sank to the floor, the silk of her robe pooling around her. The horror of the realization was intertwined with a dark, sickening sense of belonging. She hadn't been saved by a chance wrong number text. She had been cultivated. Her suffering had been the soil, and Junho had been the gardener, waiting for the exact moment of her greatest harvest. She looked up at the photos again. She saw the bruises she had hidden under makeup, now immortalized under expensive gallery lighting. Marcus had been her tormentor, but Junho had been her audience. He had watched her darkest moments, not with pity, but with a hunger that had finally been fed. The door behind her chimed. Zara didn't need to turn around to know the heavy, sandalwood-scented presence that now stood in the threshold. "You found it," Junho said, his voice echoing in the vault. Zara didn't look back. She stared at a photo of herself from 3 years ago, looking into the camera as if she could see him through the lens. "You let it happen," she said, her voice a hollow shell. "You could have stopped him 1,000 times." Junho walked across the room, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder, his thumb stroking the base of her neck just above the silk. "If I had taken you when you were whole, you would have fought me. You would have looked for the law, for your brother, for a way out." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "I needed you to learn that the world is a cruel place, Zara. I needed you to understand that Marcus was just a small monster. I am the one who owns the dark. And in the dark, you are finally perfectly safe." Zara closed her eyes, a single tear tracing the path of an old bruise. She was in a room filled with her own life, but it was a life she no longer owned. She was the archive. She was the obsession. And as Junho pulled her up to face him, she realized that the man who had watched her fall was the only one she would ever allow to see her stand. The basement of the estate did not look like a dungeon. It looked like a high-end surgical theater. It was a cavernous space of poured concrete and brilliant, overhead LED panels that hummed with a low, electric vibration. The air was colder here, carrying the sharp, metallic tang of industrial cleaner and the heavy scent of damp earth. In the center of the room, illuminated by a singular, focused spotlight, Marcus Banks sat strapped to a heavy steel chair. He looked unrecognizable from the man who had loomed over Zara in their bathroom. His designer shirt was torn and stained with sweat, his face a map of swollen bruises and desperate, leaking tears. He was gagged, his eyes wide and rolling in his head, darting frantically around the shadows until they landed on the two figures emerging from the elevator. Zara walked at Junho's side, the silk of her robe replaced by a tailored black dress that clung to her healing frame. Her right hand was still braced, but she carried it with a new, stiff dignity. Junho didn't touch her. He walked a half step behind, his presence a silent, suffocating weight that pushed her toward the light. When they reached the edge of the spotlight, Junho reached out and pulled the gag from Marcus's mouth. "Zara." Marcus's voice was a jagged rasp, a pathetic scramble for the old power he used to wield. "Zara, baby, thank God. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell this crazy bastard to let me go. I'll make it up to you, I swear." We'll leave. We'll start over. Be quiet, Marcus, Zara said. Her voice was flat, echoing off the concrete walls like a stone dropped into a well. It was the first time she had ever spoken over him, and the sound of it made Marcus flinch as if she had struck him. Junho stepped into the light, the geometric tattoos on his neck appearing like a second skin under the white glare. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small, weighted object wrapped in velvet. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked only at Zara. He is the last thread, Junho said, his voice a low, melodic vibration. As long as he draws breath, you are Zara Banks, the victim of Magnolia Lane. As long as he exists, there's a version of you that is small and broken and afraid. He unwrapped the velvet, revealing a heavy, blackened steel pistol. It was sleek, silent, and final. He held it out to her, the grip toward her good hand. I have already erased you from the world's records, Junho continued, leaning down so his lips were mere inches from her ear. Now, you must erase the memory from your own heart. This is the choice, Zara. You can walk out of this room and try to find a life as a ghost, forever looking over your shoulder. Or you can end the past here, in the dark, and step into the light as my equal. Marcus began to sob, a wet, guttural sound that filled the room. Zara, please, you're not a killer. You're a good woman. Don't let him turn you into this. Zara looked at the gun, then at Marcus. She saw the man who had twisted her arm until it snapped like dry kindling. She saw the man who had kept her in a neck brace while he whispered that he loved her. Then she looked at Junho. She saw the man who had watched her suffer for 3 years just to ensure she had nowhere else to go. She realized then that Junho wasn't just testing her resolve. He was testing her appetite. He wanted to see if she could embrace the mercilessness that defined his world. He wanted to see if his masterpiece could handle the weight of the ink. With a slow, deliberate motion, Zara reached out and took the weapon. It was heavier than she expected, cold and purposeful. She felt the gaze of the two monsters on her. One pathetic and broken in a chair, the other elegant and lethal at her shoulder. She stepped forward, entering the circle of light. Marcus's eyes went to the gun, his pleas turning into a high-pitched, incoherent whine. Zara didn't feel the surge of rage she expected. She didn't feel the heat of revenge. She felt only a profound, freezing clarity. To Marcus, she was a possession to be used. To Junho, she was a treasure to be guarded. Neither had ever seen her as a person, but only one of them offered her the power to never be hurt again. She raised the weapon, her good arm steady, her eyes locked onto Marcus's. You were right about one thing, Marcus, she whispered, the words intended only for the three of them. I am nothing without you, because Zara Banks died in that fire. I'm someone else now. The sound of the shot was muffled, a sharp metallic thud that was instantly swallowed by the vastness of the basement. Marcus slumped in the chair, the light in his eyes extinguished as easily as a candle in a gale. The silence that followed was absolute. Zara didn't move. She didn't tremble. She simply watched the shadow of the chair grow long across the floor. Junho stepped up behind her, his large, warm hands coming to rest on her shoulders. He leaned forward, his cheek pressing against hers, his eyes fixed on the empty shell of her past. Perfect, he breathed, the word a dark coronation. He took the gun from her unresisting hand and tucked it away. He didn't offer comfort because he knew she didn't want it. He offered her his arm, and as they walked back toward the elevator, leaving the spotlight behind, Zara realized she wasn't walking away from the darkness. She was walking deeper into it. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what was waiting in the shadows. The night air atop the estate was crisp, carrying the faint, salt-tinged scent of the harbor far below. Zara stood at the edge of the glass-walled balcony, the wind whipping the hem of her crimson silk gown around her ankles. She looked out over the sprawling canopy of the city, a sea of flickering lights and shadowed canyons that once felt like a labyrinthine trap. Now, from this height, it looked like a map. She lifted her right hand, flexing her fingers. The movement was fluid, the skin smooth and free of the heavy bandages that had once defined her. The deep, aching fractures were gone, mended by surgeons whose silence had been bought with more money than she had ever seen in her life. She reached up to touch her neck. The rigid plastic brace was a memory. In its place sat a heavy collar of black diamonds, cool and heavy against her skin, a mark of status that felt more like a promise than a weight. Zara didn't flinch when she heard the heavy, deliberate tread of footsteps on the stone behind her. She didn't turn around until she felt the heat of him radiating against her back, a familiar, predatory warmth that had become her only North Star. Lee Junho stepped into the moonlight beside her. He had discarded his tie and unbuttoned his vest, the geometric ink on his throat stark and mesmerizing in the silver light. He looked out at the city, his expression as unreadable as the dark water of the bay, but his presence was a jagged, electric force that demanded her attention. "The transition is complete," Junho said, his voice a low, melodic vibration that seemed to harmonize with the wind. "The world has forgotten the woman who bled on a bathroom floor. They have buried her memory beneath the ashes of Magnolia Lane." Zara looked at him, her eyes tracing the sharp lines of his profile. The fear that had once paralyzed her had been forged into something harder, sharper. She thought of the basement, the muffled sound of the shot, and the way the light had left Marcus's eyes. It hadn't been an ending. It had been an initiation. "I don't miss her," Zara whispered. "The woman she was always waiting for someone to